The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the living room in a dim golden light. Sat nestled on the couch, blanket draped over my legs, lost in the pages of a gripping mystery novel. The steady rhythm of rain tapped against the window, creating a cozy ambience within the confines of my home. Suddenly, amidst the tranquility, faint noise interrupted the symphony of raindrops. My ears perked up, attuned to the slightest disturbance. I glanced around, searching for the source of the sound. There it was again, a soft, barely audible creaking, like the gentle sliding of glass against its frame. I frowned, puzzled. Had I left a window open? I couldn't recall. With cautious curiosity, I turned my gaze towards the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. It stood slightly ajar, thin sliver of darkness peeking through the crack. My heart quickened with a surge of adrenaline. Distinctly remembered closing that door earlier. A sense of unease crept over me, prickling at the back of my neck. Was someone, or something, lurking just beyond the threshold? Did you hear that? I called out to my roommate, Sarah, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Hear what? Came her muffled reply. The sliding glass door, I said, my voice tinged with apprehension. I swear I heard it creaking. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She furrowed her brow, concern etched on her features, as she followed my gaze towards the door. I don't see anything, she said, peering into the darkness beyond. I shook my head, my heart still racing. Maybe it was just the wind, I offered, though the words felt hollow, even to my own ears. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the wind. Something about the way the door had opened unnerved me, sending a shiver down my spine. And as I stared into the darkness beyond, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if we weren't alone? The faint echo of my heartbeat filled the air as I approached the sliding glass door, my footsteps slow and deliberate. The creaking sound had ceased, leaving only the soft patter of rain against the window pane. With trembling hands, I reached out and pushed the door shut, the click of the lock echoing in the silent room. But even as I secured the door, the sense of unease lingered like a shadow, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that we were being watched. Sarah stood beside me, her gaze fixed on the door, her expression mirroring my own apprehension. Do you think someone was trying to break in? She whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I shook my head, though the thought had crossed my mind. I don't know, I admitted, my voice tight with uncertainty. But we should probably call the police, just to be safe. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Yeah, you're right, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'll go grab the phone. As Sarah disappeared into the depths of the house, I turned back towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness beyond seemed to press in on me, suffocating in its intensity. And as I stared into the abyss, a chill swept through me, premonition of the danger that lurked just beyond the threshold. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening played over and over in my mind like a broken record. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me, chased away by the lingering sense of unease that hung heavy in the air. The soft glow of the moon filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows across the room. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sense that danger lurked just beyond the edges of my perception. Beside me, Sarah tossed and turned, her sleep disturbed by the same restless thoughts that plagued my own mind. Are you awake? She whispered, her voice barely audible in the darkness. I turned towards her, my own anxiety mirrored in her eyes. Yeah, I admitted, my voice thick with exhaustion. I can't stop thinking about what happened earlier. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the ceiling above. Do you think we're safe here? She asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I hesitated. unsure of how to answer. I don't know, I said finally, the admission heavy on my tongue. But we can't let fear control us. We'll figure this out together. Despite my words, the sense of unease lingered, a constant presence in the darkness. And as the night stretched on, sleep remained elusive, chased away by the specter of unseen dangers that lurked just beyond the edges of our perception. In the days that followed the unsettling events of that night, a thick fog of paranoia settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent my heart racing with fear. I found myself constantly checking the locks on the doors and windows, jumping at the slightest noise. Sarah tried to reassure me, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. "It's going to be okay," she would say, her hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. "We'll get through this together." But despite her words, the sense of unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As I went about my daily routine, the world seemed to warp around me, distorted by the lens of my paranoia. Every stranger on the street, every unfamiliar sound, became a potential threat, lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. "It's just your imagination," Sarah would say, her voice tinged with frustration as she watched me double-check the locks for the umpteenth time. "We're safe here," but deep down, I knew that safety was just an illusion, a fragile facade that could be shattered at any moment. And as the days stretched into weeks, the fog of paranoia only grew thicker, obscuring the line between reality and fear. Desperate for a reprieve from the suffocating grip of paranoia, I decided to take my dog, Max, for a walk in the park. The sun was shining brightly, casting dappled patterns of light and shadow across the winding paths. With each step, I hoped to find solace in the familiar embrace of nature. Max bounded ahead, his tail wagging eagerly as he sniffed and explored his surroundings. But despite the cheerful ambience of the park, the sense of unease lingered, a shadow lurking just beyond the edges of my perception. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation of eyes boring into my back. Every rustle of the bushes, every distant sound, sent a jolt of fear coursing through me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. "It's a beautiful day," Sarah said, her voice breaking through the silence as we strolled along the path. I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of unseen dangers. "Yeah," I said absently, my gaze scanning the surrounding trees for any sign of movement. Sarah glanced at me, concern etched on her features. "Are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with worry. Forced a smile, though it felt hollow on my lips. "I'm fine," I lied, the weight of my fears pressing down on me like a leaden cloak, just enjoying the fresh air. But even as I spoke the words, I knew that the sense of unease would follow me wherever I went, a constant companion in an uncertain world. And as we continued our walk through the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just beyond the next bend in the path. As Max and I meandered along the winding path in the park, a figure suddenly emerged from behind a cluster of trees. My heart skipped a beat, my senses instantly on high alert. Tightened my grip on Max's leash, instinctively drawing him closer as the stranger drew nearer. The man was dressed in jogging attire, his breathing steady and rhythmic as he approached. Relief flooded through me as I realized he was just a jogger out for his evening run. I forced a smile, though the lingering unease from earlier still prickled at the back of my mind. "Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" the jogger said, his voice warm and friendly. I nodded, returning his smile, though I couldn't shake the feeling of tension that hung in the air. "Yeah, it's lovely," I replied, my voice strained with forced cheerfulness. Max wagged his tail, sniffing curiously at the newcomer's shoes. The jogger chuckled, reaching out to give him a pat on the head. "Friendly dog you've got there," he said, his gaze flicking back to me. I nodded again, my grip on Max's leash loosening slightly. "He's the best," I said, the tension in my shoulders easing ever so slightly. The jogger bid us farewell, continuing on his run with a wave over his shoulder. As he disappeared around a bend in the path, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Despite my initial apprehension, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief at the encounter. But as we resumed our walk through the park, the unease returned, a nagging presence at the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That danger still lurked just beyond the edges of my perception. And as the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped below the horizon, I quickened my pace, eager to return home and escape the lingering sense of unease that hung in the air as the evening sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the park. Max and I continued our leisurely stroll along the winding path. Despite the picturesque surroundings, the lingering unease from earlier still gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes ahead caught my attention, causing my heart to leap into my throat. I tensed, my grip on Max's leash tightening as I scanned the surrounding foliage for any sign of movement. My mind raced with 1,000 worst-case scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. But to my relief, a familiar figure emerged from the underbrush. The park ranger, clad in the standard uniform of green and khaki, exhaled a shaky breath, the tension draining from my shoulders as he approached. "Evening," the ranger greeted, his voice calm and steady. "Good evening," I replied, offering him a weak smile. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" The ranger nodded, his gaze sweeping over the tranquil scenery. "Sure is," he said, his tone casual. "Just doing my rounds, making sure everything's in order." I nodded in understanding, though the unease from earlier still lingered in the back of my mind. "Thank you for keeping the park safe," I said, genuine gratitude coloring my words. The ranger tipped his hat in acknowledgement, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "It's all part of the job," he said. "You folks have a good evening now." With that, the ranger continued on his patrol, disappearing into the gathering dusk. I watched him go, a sense of relief washing over me as the tension eased from my body. Despite the encounter, the lingering unease remained, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked just beyond the edges of my perception. And as Max and I resumed our walk through the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes followed our every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The park was bathed in the soft glow of twilight as Max and I continued our walk, the shadows lengthening with each passing moment. Despite my efforts to shake off the lingering sense of unease, it clung to me like a heavy cloak, weighing me down with each step. As we rounded a bend in the path, a movement caught my eye, a fleeting shadow darting behind a nearby tree. My heart lurched in my chest, fear coursing through my veins like icy tendrils. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to catch another glimpse of whatever, or whoever, lurked in the darkness. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Sarah, who walked beside me, her eyes wide with concern. Sarah frowned, her gaze flicking towards the tree in question. "See what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, my pulse racing with adrenaline. "I thought I saw something," I admitted, my voice tight with fear, but maybe it was just my imagination. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on my arm, her touch grounding me in reality. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're together, and we'll get through this." But even as she spoke the words, the sense of danger lingered, a tangible presence in the air. I glanced nervously around us, the darkness seeming to press in on all sides, and as we continued our walk through the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched our every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That night, as darkness descended upon the world, I lay in bed, my senses on high alert, every sound magnified to a deafening roar in the silence. The events of the past days weighed heavily on my mind, the sense of impending danger looming like a specter in the darkness. Suddenly, a creaking sound echoed through the house, the hair-raising noise sending a chill down my spine. My heart leaped into my throat as I bolted upright, every nerve in my body on edge. I strained to listen, my ears attuned to the slightest disturbance. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, the sound growing louder with each passing moment. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave as I realized that someone, or something, was in the house. "Sarah," I whispered hoarsely, shaking her awake beside me. "Wake up, there's someone here." Sarah's eyes flew open, fear flickering in their depths as she registered my words. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling with anxiety. "We need to call the police," I replied, my hands shaking as I reached for the phone on the bedside table. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911, my heart hammering in my chest as I relayed our address to the dispatcher. Help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity as we waited in the darkness, our breaths coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Minutes stretched into hours as we huddled together in the darkness, the sound of our pounding hearts drowning out all other noise. And then, finally, the distant wail of sirens pierced the silence, a beacon of hope cutting through the darkness. Relief flooded through me as the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the night like beacons of hope. They swept through the house with practiced efficiency, searching every nook and cranny for signs of the intruder. But when they emerged, their expressions grim, I knew that our nightmare was far from over. Despite their best efforts, the intruder had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the lingering sense of fear and uncertainty that had plagued us for days. As the police left, promising to increase patrols in the area, Sarah and I were left alone once more, the events of the night weighing heavily on our minds. And as we huddled together in the darkness, I knew that the sense of danger would linger long after the intruder had vanished into the night. In the aftermath of the break-in, a pall of fear and uncertainty hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over our once tranquil lives. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, sent us into a state of high alert, our nerves frayed with paranoia. Despite our best efforts to resume a sense of normalcy, the events of that fateful night continued to haunt us, lingering like a ghost in the corners of our minds. We installed security cameras, reinforced the locks on every door and window, but still, the sense of vulnerability remained, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked just beyond the edges of our perception. "It's not fair," Sarah said one evening, her voice tinged with frustration as we sat together in the living room, the glow of the television casting flickering shadows across the walls. "We shouldn't have to live like this, always looking over our shoulders." I nodded in silent agreement, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. "I know," I said softly, reaching out to grasp her hand in mine. "But we have to stay vigilant. We can't let fear control us." Sarah squeezed my hand, her gaze steady despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice firm with determination. "We'll get through this together." And as we sat together in the darkness, the glow of the television casting a comforting warmth over us, I knew that no matter what trials lay ahead, we would face them together, united against the unseen dangers that lurked just beyond the threshold. For in the end, it was our bond, our love for one another, that would see us through even the darkest of nights.